Prologue, Part 3, 4 years earlier, August 1997, somewhere in a peaceful Seattle suburb. Pastor Pete had just completed a heinous, depraved activity. Sweating and sated, he untied the straps that bound the naked, shivering 11-year-old boy to the bed. The chubby, fair-haired youth lay shaking uncontrollably. The restraints had been needless, really. The preacher had made the situation quite clear from the beginning. He leaned in, a warm breath away from the boy's rosy cheeks, and whispered, "If you move, if you scream, if you make any sound whatsoever, I will most assuredly kill you and dispose of your body, and no one will ever know what happened. Do you understand?" The terrified youngster nodded. The preacher's soft lips grazed lightly against the boy's ear as he continued, "And when this is over, you will tell no one, because if you do, I will find out, and I will hunt you down, and I will bring you back here, and I will kill you. Do you understand that?" Again the boy nodded. It was better to be raped and silently bear the burden of shame than to be dead. Freed from the restraints, and having somehow endured the endless minutes of terror, Rodney wanted to run, but his eyes rolled back, his eyelids fluttered uncontrollably. He nearly collapsed onto the floor. The preacher flung the straps aside and tossed the boy's clothes onto the bed. "Well, Duckworth, what are you waiting for?" He seemed genuinely perplexed by the boy's hesitation. His eyes narrowed, and he bellowed with the same grandiose, commanding voice that the boy had heard so many times, thundering from the high pulpit on Sunday mornings. "Go now, and sin no more." Then he added, almost parenthetically, "And use the back door on your way out, for Christ's sake." The boy's response to the command was instant. He grabbed his clothes and threw them on in a single fluid motion. In the process, something slipped from the pocket of his jeans and rolled under the bed. He didn't bother to see what it was. He didn't care. It didn't matter. He fled across the floor of the preacher's bedroom, flew down the stairs to the living room and out the back door. The preacher knelt down to see what had rolled under the bed. He retrieved it easily and stood up. In his hand, he held one of the boy's prized possessions, something that cost the boy 2 cereal box tops and 50 cents of his allowance. It was a black plastic coin, about the size of a silver dollar, embossed on one side with the Batman logo, and the image of that famed masked crusader on the reverse. It was the 9th and final coin in the set, and Rodney had collected them all. The preacher stared blankly at it for a moment, then flipped it into the air. With a sweeping motion, like swatting at a fly, he caught it, gave it a final moment of consideration, then dropped it into the bottom drawer of his dresser. A memento of sorts, a keepsake, a trivial thing. The boy would never miss it. That night, Rodney discovered his precious Batman coin was gone, and he knew who had it. Sunday morning, as Pastor Pete preached on the sins of the flesh, young Rodney Duckworth glared at him from a back pew as he sat somberly squeezed between the alcoholic breath of his useless father and the overbearing perfume of his self-righteous mother. The boy watched the preacher's mouth moving, but he heard nothing coming from it. The only sound he heard was that of his own inner voice struggling to formulate a vow of revenge. But his 11-year-old vocabulary had not yet acquired words strong enough, dark enough, to articulate the phrasing necessary to form a vow of such a deep and bitter hatred. Hard as he tried, only one word seemed to surface with any clarity. But it was enough. It was loaded. ready to explode. Someday. For a brief moment, he fantasized a scenario in which his hero Batman would swoop in and wreak havoc on the evil villain behind the pulpit, but the fantasy faded quickly. He knew full well there was no Batman. No, he would have to manage this revenge on his own. He didn't know how, but he knew he would. Someday. He relaxed with a long, slow breath, folded his arms, bowed his head, and drifted into a half-sleep, waiting for the someday that would surely come. 4 years later. Chubby little Rodney Duckworth was now 15 years old, and not so little. He was thrilled to learn of Pastor Pete's heart attack and couldn't have been more pleased that the bastard had moved out of the neighborhood. Nevertheless, he was still emotionally and psychologically scarred from the abuse he suffered at the pastor's pleasure, an experience he never shared with a living soul. He was also tired of being bullied by his schoolmates, who constantly taunted him with names like Rubber Ducky, or worse yet, Rodney Fuckworth Not Worth a Fuck. That was the year Rodney Duckworth had taken all he could take, and he decided to do something about it. It was time for a change. If he couldn't change the bullies, he would change himself like Bruce Wayne, transforming into Batman. He didn't know what he would change himself into or how he was going to go about it, but he was determined to make it happen. Rodney only had one real friend in the entire world. His name was Jason Hall. Jason played rhythm guitar in the school orchestra, and of course, anybody who played anything in the school orchestra was automatically branded as a nerd or a geek, which, in Jason's case, was actually a fitting description. Pimple-faced and skinny, Jason didn't have much going for him, but he did have 3 things that Rodney coveted: a huge collection of Batman comic books, and 2 guitars. Up in Jason's bedroom, on a rainy Saturday afternoon, Rodney finished reading one of Jason's vintage Batman comic books, carefully slid it back into a protective plastic sleeve, and picked up one of Jason's electric guitars. He strummed the strings with his thumb. The sound was tinny and barely audible without the amplifier. He looked at his friend. "Can you teach me how to play?" Jason shrugged. "Sure, I guess." "Cool. What do I do?" Jason took hold of Rodney's left hand and helped him place his fingers in the correct positions on the neck of the instrument to form the notes for a C chord. "Okay," he said. "Strum it." Rodney strummed the strings, but still it was tinny and didn't exactly sound like Stairway to Heaven. "Plug it in," Jason said. Then he grinned. "It'll probably sound just as bad, only louder." Rodney plugged the cord into the amp and turned it on. Jason adjusted a couple of knobs and turned the volume up full. "Go ahead," he said, handing him a plastic pick. "Let her rip." Rodney gripped the pick between his thumb and forefinger, raised his arm back as if he was about to burn a 90-mile-an-hour fastball over home plate, and ripped the pick across the strings. The deafening sound slammed the air with the force of a hurricane. It rattled the windows and shook the walls. The sonic blast was immediately followed by the voice of Jason's father shouting up the stairs. "Turn it down, goddammit! You want to wake the dead?" Rodney looked at Jason and grinned. "Yup," he said quietly, with a kind of prophetic confidence. "That's exactly what I want to do." There's an old story, a true story, at least in part, and famous among guitarists, about a young black man, a guitar player named Robert Johnson. Johnson was born into poverty in the Deep South in 1911. He endured a life fraught with hardship and trouble, but he managed to learn to play the guitar. He soon gained some local recognition as a good blues guitarist, but good wasn't good enough for Robert. One day, he disappeared from the local music scene, and no one knew where he'd gone. A short time later, he reappeared, guitar in hand, but now he could play the hell out of that thing, as one of the locals put it. Legend has it that during his short absence, he had gone to the crossroads. According to the folklore of the rural South, the place where two roads crossed was often thought to be a kind of evil vortex, where the devil could pop up at any moment and steal the souls of unsuspecting travelers. As the story goes, Robert Johnson took a walk to the infamous dusty crossroads of Highways 61 and 49 in Clarksdale, Mississippi, where, in the middle of the night, under a full moon, he made a deal with the devil. The deal was simple. Robert promised his soul to the devil if, in exchange, the devil would bestow upon him the ability to play blues guitar like no one had ever heard before. The devil agreed, took the guitar from Robert, retuned it, and handed it back to him. That done, the deal was sealed, and Robert, he walked away into the night and into the realm of legend. Young Rodney Duckworth didn't know this story the first time he struck that resounding C chord in Jason's bedroom. Nevertheless, that very moment, on that rainy afternoon, was Rodney's first step on his journey to the crossroads. 3 years later, Rodney Duckworth was now the lead guitar player and primary vocalist of his own death metal band, Gravestone. The band was good, but echoing the Robert Johnson story, which by now Rodney had indeed heard, good wasn't good enough. Rodney's disenchantment had nothing to do with the other members of the band, really. They weren't the problem. His boyhood friend, Jason, played great rhythm guitar. Billy Cox was a monster on bass, and Rick DiCarlo was arguably one of the best young drummers around. But nothing was happening. A few gigs had come their way, but most of them paid so little it was hardly worth the effort. It wasn't for lack of trying. They tried everything. They tried everything they could think of to promote the band. They even posted videos of two of their best live performances on the internet. And despite their efforts to promote the videos through a number of popular online social networking sites, no one seemed to be taking notice. Rodney himself had developed into a good guitar player, a very good guitar player, in fact. But that, he decided, was the problem. Good and very good were not going to cut it. Good guitar players, even very good guitar players, were a dime a dozen. He needed to be flat-out motherfucking kick-ass great if they were going to go anywhere at all in this business. But how? Sell his soul to the devil? Not likely. At least, not yet. No, the only way it was going to happen was for him to do it on his own. And this goal became an insane obsession. After several months of driving himself to the brink of exhaustion, choosing to play rather than eat, drink, or sleep, he finally made the breakthrough that his tortured, sometimes bleeding fingers had been striving for. The litmus test for his arrival into the realm of motherfucking kick-ass greatness would be to slip any Eddie Van Halen CD into the player and match every blazing solo, note for note, the finger taps, the pull-offs, the tapping harmonics, the works. The day he broke through that barrier was the day he put the guitar down, collapsed onto the bed, and slept for 18 hours straight. And somewhere, near the end of that stretch of darkness, he had a dream that would change the course of his life forever. Just a few short years earlier, in fact, Just a day or so after he'd struck that first C chord in Jason's bedroom at the age of 15, Rodney had been surfing the internet for information about heavy metal bands. It was during one of those searches that he stumbled upon a website dedicated to the infamous practitioner of the dark arts, Aleister Crowley. Rodney was immediately taken with the concept behind Crowley's ideas about ritual magic. The word magic in this case was spelled with a CK instead of just a C, as Rodney learned, to differentiate it from the parlor tricks and the illusions produced by stage magicians. This was not that. This was the real thing. Rodney felt a strangely intimate connection with Crowley, especially resonating with Crowley's own tortured Christian upbringing and his later rebellion against the whole idea of Christianity. For the next 3 years, Rodney delved ever deeper into the writings and the activities of the strange man whom he learned had once been known as the Beast, the wickedest man in the world. But there was another name Crowley had taken for himself, a name not as well known to most people. The name was Megatherion. It was Greek for the Great Beast. Presently, as Rodney lay dreaming, his mind reeled with strange, surrealistic images, the shrill sounds of blazing guitar riffs and the faces of unrecognizable people. Then he began drifting away from it all, or it was all drifting away from him, until he found himself alone in the middle of an intersection where 2 dusty, deserted roads crossed. He stood there, squinting against the glare of a blazing hot sun. The air was dead still. The heavy smell of dry grass and baked earth stuffed his nostrils. Disoriented and utterly lost, he looked around for something, anything that seemed familiar. But all he could see in any direction was flat, desolate land. Soon, unnaturally soon it seemed, the sunlight began to fade. Purple shadows crept across the barren landscape, and moments later he was enveloped in an eerie darkness, save for the glow of a full moon directly overhead. Out of the corner of his eye, he noticed the silhouette of a figure, perhaps a man, in the distance, at the far end of the road to his left. Soon another, an exact duplicate of the first, appeared at the far end of the road to his right. He spun around now and saw another on the road behind him. He turned back and saw yet another figure down the road in front of him. From the 4 directions, the dark figures approached, until they converged at the center of the crossroads, where he watched them merge, coalescing into the single figure of a solitary man. "Hello, Rodney. Do you know who I am?" "Yes. You're the Beast." But I have another name, you know." "I know. Let me hear you say it." "Megatherion." "Very good. Now that, too, shall be the name of your band." "This is the name of my band? Why?" "Just trust me. Now, tell me your name." "My name? You know my name." "Let me hear you say it." "Rodney." "Rodney what?" "Rodney Duckworth." "Does that sound to you like the name of the leader of a death metal band?" "No, I guess not." "Indeed not. Your name shall now be known to the world as Rai Aren. And I do mean the world. Simple as that. Ha." Rodney awoke with a start, drenched in sweat and shaking from the encounter. He looked at his watch. It was just after 2 a.m. He didn't know what day it was, or what night it was. He only knew he had to call Jason. "Jace?" "Rodney? What's up, dude? You sound like you got a hangover." "Listen, man, get the guys together. We gotta meet at the garage." "Dude, you know what time it is? I don't care. Just do it. This is important. What the fuck, man? Are you nuts? You been drinking? Jason, just do it, man. All right, Jesus, I'll call them, but they're not going to want to come over. I mean, like Rick, man. He's got to get up and go to work in the morning, and Billy, I don't know what he's doing. Probably doing that chick that he met the other day. He definitely won't be coming over if that's the case. You should see her, man. Jeez, she's... Just fucking call them, will ya? Tell them to get their asses over to your place. We'll meet at the garage. Jason's parents owned a nice suburban home with a double-car garage separated from the house. The house and the garage were situated a considerable distance from the street and were separated from any neighboring homes by a vacant lot on each side. It was a perfect setup for the band's long and hellaciously loud practice sessions. The garage had become much more than just the birthplace of Rodney's band. In Rodney's mind, it was a holy place, his church. The guitar was his crucifix, and death metal was his religion, a religion he wore wrapped around him like a cloak. Jason, Rick, and Billy were in it for the fun of it, the comradeship, something to do. Rodney was in it because he had no choice. Why don't you call them? Jason argued. Your phone's not broken. What the hell is the big deal anyway? Believe me, it is a big deal. The band has a new name. What? And so do I. What? The fuck are you talking about? I'll explain when I get there. I've got some things to do. Now call the guys. Rodney's announcement about changing his name, as well as the name of the band, was met with extreme skepticism by the rest of the group that night in the garage. But eventually, somewhat reluctantly, they succumbed to Rodney's bizarre idea. The band was going nowhere in its current incarnation, so they figured it couldn't hurt. They could never, however, in their wildest rock star wannabe fantasies, have imagined the extraordinary and ultimately horrific chain of events that this decision was about to unleash.